Okay, let's talk about multidimensional arrays and stay with me on this. It sounds complex, it sounds scary, intimidating, but it's actually not. It's very easy to grasp and understand. It's just you might get hung up on the terminology. So all we're essentially doing is we're taking a normal array. Here we go, an array that has one progression. We're adding another axis of progression on it. So here we maybe have an x-axis. We're going to add a y-axis to this as well. Okay, so what does this look like? Well, let me ask you this: have you played Battleship? Right, you call out a square like a B8, and they will see if that matches on there, and you're basically storing these little markers inside of this grid-based system here. And if you haven't done that, maybe you've played Connect 4. Right, if we wanted to access this element here, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3. Right, so that would be 3, 3. Okay, 3 on the x-axis, 3 on the y-axis. And maybe you've done Excel before, or Google Spreadsheets, something like this, where we've used a program to store values, create formulas, do all these sorts of accounting or business-related types of data handling before. So you've been accustomed to this, perhaps. And if all that fails, you've played tic-tac-toe. So essentially, all this is we're making a grid to where we can access elements via a coordinate system. Okay, so that's all it is we're just adding the ability to access data at a row and a column. So it's a grid-based system. So if we were asked to program any of those games that we saw previously, Tic-Tac-Toe, Battleship, Connect 4, we might elect to use a two-dimensional array in order to do that. Okay, so essentially we're just accessing, if we want this element right here, we need to access row 1, right? So it's row 1, column 2. Okay, so let's look at this real quick. I have an array of 3 elements here. I want to make this a 2D array. I want to have 2 rows, 3 columns in the array. Now the way we need to do that is if we were wanting to add two rows rather to this, and the rows again are the vertical progression here. Okay, so this is your y-axis, and we want to have the existing 3 columns, right, 3 elements across. Then what we need to do is we need to put a second subscript in. Okay, the second subscript will automatically convert this to the two-dimensional array, and the initialization will be pretty different. So let's go ahead and pop in a 2. Here we go. So now it's constantly declared. So now I need to provide, I don't have to, but I'm going to, so that I can show you what initialization looks like for a two-dimensional array. Okay, so we essentially have 2 rows of 3 elements. Okay, so this is row the first. So I need to group that first collection inside of another set of curly braces. Okay, so that's the first row. And then I need to comma separate my second collection of 3 elements. Okay, so I'll start from 4. I'll do 4, 5, 6. Okay, and each one of these need to be comma separated. And there it is. That's my 2D array. Now this seems a little confusing and it's kind of hard to read. So if I wanted to access 5, what is that? Well, it would actually be 1, 1. Thinking, okay, why? Well, if we're thinking about the grid, it would be 1 down and 1 over. So 0, 1, 0, 1. and that's where that would be at. That's where 5 would be at. It's a little hard to read that this way, so I do like to use another way of representing the 2D array, and that is with this type of formatting. Now you can see the grid. You can see it exactly how it is, and it's very easy to just go down 0, 1, 0, 1. So this would be element 1, 1. Okay? And if we want to access that element, if we want to access 5, we could simply see out, just like we are used to with arrays, we could see out that element. If we did 1, 1, that's going to print 5. And just so you know I'm not lying to you, let's go ahead and move this over here so you can see, and there's 5 right there. So we just access that element out of the multi-dimensional array. So, as I promised, not too daunting, actually pretty easy to go through. Let's go ahead and look at a sample program that's going to show us how to use loops to parse through the array, because you might be wondering, okay, I know that the for loop is the array's best friend. How does that work with a two-dimensional array? Also, how do I pass a two-dimensional array into a function? Real quick, let's go ahead and do that. Let's make 2 functions. One's going to fill an array, one is going to print an array. And I know we've been doing a lot of this back and forth in previous assignments and discussions. So let's go ahead and do the same thing, but now with a 2D array. Let me kind of shrink this down here. Don't need this. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and make my first function, which is going to be a void function called fill array. Alright. I'm just going to go ahead and set this up. And in fill array is going to take 2 arguments. It's going to take the array itself, which I'm going to also call just ARR. And ARR is going to be a 2-dimensional array. I'm also going to pass the number of rows over as well. Okay, so we have the array and we have the number of rows coming in. Now we see a little red underline here on the second subscript, and notice I've only passed one variable, one integer, which I'm going to use the size. So how do we deal with this? Well, here's the only thing that is limiting about passing the array, is you can no longer just pass any size array over here without learning some material that unfortunately we haven't got to yet. So since we haven't gotten to that lecture yet, we don't have that knowledge. What we'd have to do is we're going to have to pass a constant in here. This can be any size, but it has to match what you've declared inside of the in where the array is actually being passed from. Okay, so it has to be the same size. So this constant here, we're going to have to match it to our original because we're going to reference this array right here. So this can only be three elements across here. This can only be 3 columns. Okay, now we can omit this here just like we can with the single dimension, but as soon as we cross into the second dimension, got to put it in there. Okay, so we have fill array. Here it is. Let's go ahead and just we're just going to fill this array just with the iterator. So let's go ahead and pull in a for loop. Okay, and let's set this up int I, and I is going to be equal to 0 because we're starting it off. I is less than, and here's where we can use rows. Okay, rows is something we've passed in. I plus plus. Okay, So that takes care of that in the rows. But what about the columns? How do we deal with the columns? Well, here's where it gets a little tricky. We actually have to use a nested loop. And the nested loop is a must for going through a two-dimensional array. Okay, so you have to use a nested loop. So we're going to use int j. J is equal to 0. J is less than 3 is our size on this, or is it? Let's think about it. Columns, rows, columns. Hopefully you haven't got this confused, and that's why we named this rows. The outer loop is going to deal with the rows. The inner loop is going to deal with the columns. So this is the horizontal progression here. This is the vertical progression. So just a real quick, way to remember that. Let's finish this inner for loop here. J is less than 3, J plus plus. Okay. Cool. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the array and we're going to access the elements in here, and we're going to set one of these one of these elements, whichever one that we're on currently at that time, we're going to set it equal to something. Okay, so let's say array ARR, and inside of here we're going to put I, right? I is the rows, and then in here J, whoops, I put K, let's put J. J is assigned with, what do we want to do? We want to just put the number of iterations that we're on. We could do that, no problem at all. I'm going to go ahead and spice this up a little bit though, and I'm going to pull in, I've decided I want to pull in a random number for this. So no problem to do that at all. All we need to do is just use the rand function. Okay, so we're going to use rand, and then we're going to say random number, and let's do it 1 through 10, or yeah, 1 through 10. So we'll do modulus 10 plus 1. That'll offset it, so that instead from 0 to 9, that'll be from 1 to 10. Okay, and that will fill the array. Now let's go ahead and make a function to print the array. Okay, and it's actually going to look very much like this. Okay, so much that I'm actually going to paste it here and just change a few parameters. I'm going to call it print array. And the for loop's the same, but I'm going to go ahead and erase this here because we're actually going to change this into a cout statement. We're going to cout ARR is our array. We're going to cout where we are in the I iterator and where we are in the J iterator, which is the columns. Okay, and then we're going to do something here. I know we've talked about the escape commands before, but this is where they'll actually really shine to kind of spread things out a little bit. We're going to go ahead and use a tab on this. That way it kind of just pushes everything out, so it's nice and neat on the grid. Okay. Lastly, we need to separate the rows between each other. So we're going to go ahead and end the line down here. This is just a formatting thing, so the grid actually lines up. You'll see this in a second. If not, go ahead and retype this here and leave this off, and you'll see what it does. It doesn't format it correctly in the grid fashion here. Doesn't mean that it's not populating anything or change. It's just the way that we're seeing it on the screen. It's not visually representative of this here, what we're after. Okay, so let's go ahead and start this thing up here. Let's get our prototypes in. Let's call these functions from main. We're ready to go. Okay, get these prototypes up. Okay, let's call fill array first. Okay, fill array is going to take the array itself, and it's going to take the number of rows, which, how many rows are there? 2. Okay, and then print array is pretty much going to be the same thing. Print array, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste here. Good old copy paste. All right, and I tend to lose track of where I am when I start jammering on here, so hopefully we haven't made any build errors here. It doesn't look like we have. Let me make sure I don't have any warnings or anything like that. No, it looks good. Doc. And go away. Okay, let me go ahead and bring this over here. And here is our grid. We have 2, 8, 5, 1, 10, 5. Now, you might be wondering, why doesn't it show 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? And that's because we overrode that by actually filling the array with random numbers. Random numbers between 1 and 10. Now, just to show you that I'm not, not just blowing smoke here, let's go ahead and redo this. And I've commented out the fill array. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just like we did. So that's declaring a 2D array, populating it, printing it, which also includes nested for loops for iterating through the array, and how to deal with passing that two-dimensional array through. Now, one more curveball to throw at you. Remember that picture of Excel that I showed you? This one here. Let me see. Yes. See these bottom tabs down here? Well, you have not only this grid of A, B, C, D, E, which these are the columns, these are the rows here. You also have pages of these here. Now, before brains explode, what this actually looks like is it looks like a cube. Okay, so it kind of actually looks like a cube to where you can store multiple instances of these grids. So think of a Rubik's Cube here. Think of a Rubik's Cube. You can have all these values on the green side. You can also have all these values on the top side, which may be the white side. And there's the blue side, and they're all around this cube. Well, you can actually do that with multiple dimensions on there. Now, again, this is out of really the scope of this class, and if you're finding yourself needing to make multi-dimensional arrays, I'm going to tell you to not be so dead set that that's the only way. There are actually going to be a lot better ways to handle your data later on. So hang out just for a little bit longer and continue through computer science, and you will find that there's a lot of other cool ways to handle data. And you're not trapped with these more primitive designs here. But with all that said, I want to show you, lastly, the adding just another dimension on here, just to show you that you can take this above and beyond. I'm going to add a third dimension onto this. So hopefully, you don't freak out. What we're after is we're after this Excel kind of design here, the Rubik's Cube. So stay with me, and we're going to make the 3D array. So if we want a 3D array of, say, 2 rows, 2 pages, and 3 columns, what we actually need to do is we need to actually add another, and I'll just put it here. We need to actually add another progression to this here. Now our data is not lining up. And the reasons why it's not lining up is because we actually need another set of these here. So if we were to make another set, it could look like this. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then let's comma separate these here. 7, 8, 9. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and put spaces between these. That way you can see the sets here. Okay, so let's go ahead and put and wrap these. Yes, this is very clunky and very messy. And again, the reason why I'm doing this is because it's pretty messy. So good. Let's go ahead and make the other value here 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I even have trouble sometimes making sure, do I have enough curly braces? Do I have this? Do I have that? It gets very messy really quick. Okay, so we have page 1 and page 2 in here. This is page 1. This is page 2. Yeah, it's pretty confusing. Okay, so adding on to all of our functions. Let's see, 2. Whoops, missed 2. And let's change our arrays here to support that second page. Okay, I think we've done it. All right, and we now need to visit our functions here to handle a 3-dimensional array. So what does that look like? Well, we have outer loop, inner loop, and now we need another nested innermost loop. So we're going to go ahead, and by the way, guys, if you get completely lost at this, just disregard the whole last half of this this video lecture here. This is just to show you it can be done. There's not going to be any test on this or any sort of review on this. If you plan on continuing in computer science and you're not stopping here, please understand just this simple concept, and then you can move on. No problem at all. If it's confusing you and causing you to have a mental breakdown, don't worry. This is not a concept that I expect you to grasp right up from the front. Let's continue. Okay, for int k equals 0, k is less than, what is this going to be? This is actually going to be 3. And the reason why it's 3 is because it's going to take this spot here. So we're going to change this to 2. K is less than 3. K plus plus. All right, let's get our curly braces in. All right, so we have I, J, and then we need to add on K. And now that is going to handle a 3-dimensional array. And because we're lazy, I'm going to go ahead and move that that whole for loop mess that we just made down here. And instead, we're going to print this out. So we're going to see out the array. We're also going to see out those tabs. Tab and tab backslash. There we go. And semicolon. And down here, we're going to have an end line. And we're going to need one down here. Yes. Cool. All right, that's done. Let's go ahead and allow it to fill the array. So there it is. There's page 1, page 2. These are the random array values called from fill array. Let's go ahead and comment fill array back out. And let's go ahead and look at the values as they're initialized. Okay, here we are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, page 2, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, you made it to the end. That is 2-dimensional arrays and 3-dimensional arrays. Everything else beyond that is ludicrous, and don't worry about it, but it can be done, and it can be stretched even further from this. So that was a lot to take in. Watch this a couple of times if it didn't make sense. Ask questions on the discussion board, and let's continue on with the maximum of 2 dimensions from here on out. All right, guys, thanks, and let's further the discussion on discussion board if we have any questions on this.